The day was December 8th of 1962, and it was his second year actually of hunting with a bow, actually the last day of the bow season. The morning that he shot the deer, he always described it as being a real foggy morning, the kind of morning that maybe a big deer might like to go out and roam around a little bit because there's some cover, and he hadn't been on his stand very long. He was standing on the edge of a mining road off of a main trail that he had already researched, checked it out, and there had been a lot of deer traffic. He heard this noise. The deer looked like it was pushing a bunch of brush down a trail. It had its nose down. And what he didn't realize at that point, coming through the brush, that it was the rack. And it actually startled him. And I think he had said several times, he thought he knew the deer could probably hear him because his heart was beating and pounding. And he said the deer came up to the fence, and he described it as it poured itself over the fence. It was so massive. It just stepped up to the fence and just flowed over the fence like a water out of a cup. And he was already set and ready. He drew the bow. At the same time, the deer heard something and looked right at him, and he let the arrow fly. The deer whirled, and that's when his shot was taken in another area than what he was aiming at. And he stood there, and he heard the deer stop probably about 50 yards away in the timber. So he left, and he was so concerned about the shot, the poor shot, that we didn't go back out there for 4 hours. So we went out later that day with a group of people. We stopped on this road where he had stood, and there was a little triangle of timber to the north. We walked into that timber and found a little blood, and then pretty soon somebody found the arrow, and that kind of, everybody's jaw kind of dropped that, that's not good, because the arrow only showed about 4 or 5 inches of penetration. We just kept walking and following, and then the blood trail stopped. And we probably didn't go another 30 or 40 yards into this bean field. You could see this antler sticking up out of this bean field. And that's all you could see. You couldn't even see the deer. And it was pretty exciting. But he didn't realize at that time how big this deer was. The deer hung in his gas station in Knoxville, Iowa for several months, and my recollection is somebody came through to buy gas or buy something from the station and asked him whose deer that was, and he said that was his, hanging up on the wall. And he said, "Do you ever have it measured?" And he said, "No." Never thought about it. That night, his brother-in-law, Don Visser, and my dad spent most of the night down in the basement remeasuring this thing, thinking they're doing something wrong, because it was quite a bit larger than the former Iowa record, and actually the former world record. So he made a phone call to an official measurer in Iowa, and the guy said, "You're probably doing something wrong. Let me go through it with you." They went through it. The guy said, "I'll be down tomorrow morning because what you're telling me is right. Everything you did is absolutely right." And the guy came down and remeasured it, and it was a new world record at 197 6/8. The rack itself is probably as symmetrical of a rack as I've ever seen. Even though it's not a huge rack in comparison to some, it still adds up by not having a lot of deductions. My dad passed away in 1994, and at that time, all of us kids, what do we do with this rack? Our idea was not to sell it for profit, because my dad would never have done that. Somehow ran into Larry Huffman. Larry assisted us in setting up a foundation in my dad's name. The worth of the rack is being transferred to Iowa State University. It's going to be focusing on kids that go into conservation. I think my dad would like to see that done.